And having concluded the formalities, let me now have the pleasure of introducing Jim Mlodgenski. Jim Mlodgenski is the CTO at OpenSCG. Jim has more than 20 years of experience doing data-intensive applications and infrastructure. Before OpenSCG, Jim was CEO at StormDB, and I happened to be his colleague there, and we had an exciting ride, didn't we, Jim? And prior to that, Jim was a chief architect at Enterprise DB. So Jim is very, very active in the US of A in the PostgreSQL community, and now they have expanded across the globe in their efforts to help other organizations. And obviously, he speaks regularly at PostgreSQL and other open source conferences. And Jim, we are really, really glad to have you here. Let's hear it for Jim.
Intro. So as Nikhil mentioned, I'm CTO of OpenSCG, but that's not what I want to talk about for this hour. That's for tomorrow during the marketing stuff, or at the booth later and other things. I wanted to talk more about community stuff today, and what I do at the community. As Nikhil said, I do a lot of work inside the community in the US, which has started to expand more globally. But I'm a member of the board of the U.S. Postgres Association, which is which is about spreading the word of Postgres and advocating the use of Postgres throughout the United States. There's other organizations like that in Europe. There's PGEU, and then there's starting to get things like you're trying to do here in India as well, in order to have an umbrella organization to help grow the use of Postgres, because Postgres has been exploding over the number of years. Besides that, I also try to do things locally around the Postgres users groups. I'm one of the organizers of the New York City Postgres users group, which has grown immensely. There's over 2,400 members of that group just in that one city alone, as well as the Philadelphia Postgres users group, which is a smaller city in the US, but there's still over 800, nearly 900 members in that one group. And Philadelphia is not known as a big tech hub. There's a large number of people using Postgres together that when you approach it locally and encourage people local usage, you start getting other people involved inside of Postgres, which is hopefully what we're starting to see here in India as well. And then, as Nikhil and Pavan and Ashish do here around the conference, which takes a lot of time, so thank you guys. This is gives us an opportunity. Thank you for putting this together. This is a huge amount of work. I'm one of the chairs of the PostgresConf in the US, which is like this, but we're a few years ahead. So we're a 5-day, 5-track Postgres conference outside of New York City. But it was really only about 4 or 5 years ago we were this size, of having 2 days, about 2.5 tracks and some trainings. But it takes a lot of work in order to grow it. So we try to help out the community that way and try to advocate Postgres through these conferences and locally there. Before I get into this, just wanted to take a quick show of hands. Who's relatively new to Postgres? Who's been using Postgres for less than 2 years? So we have a fairly experienced group in here, right? Which is unusual when I go to conferences like this. What I've been seeing over and over again is people brand new to Postgres. At a lot of these conferences, is at least 50% of the room has been brand new to Postgres. Right? So when we're scheduling talks at different conferences, we need a lot of intro talks because people are brand new. They don't know what vacuum is. They don't know how to back up your database. Right? They don't know really anything about Postgres. All they know is it's this cool new technology that I should be using. Right? So also, who regularly reads the Postgres mailing lists? Right? Not just when you have a question, but reads it on a daily or weekly basis. So it's all the OpenSCG shirts, but other than that, it's anybody with a black shirt on basically is regularly reads it, but everybody else is. So how does everybody else get it? Through Stack Overflow? Something like that? You get your Postgres questions answered? Okay, so that's a challenge that we have in the community right now, is how do we get that information out? And you'll see over the history of the Postgres community of why some of that is today, right? Is Postgres doesn't have a marketing department. right? You have folks like Nikhil and Pavan who are doing a marketing job, but they're developers, they're C developers, there's hacking on the internals of Postgres. Right? Doing this sort of thing is not natural, right? They'd rather be coding, right? And that's true throughout the Postgres community as a whole, right? Doing these advocacy things are usually a secondary thing, which is, has been a challenge for the Postgres community, but that's changed in the recent days, and you'll see. Right, so this talk is going to be the Postgres community from a Western worldview. So there's a whole lot of Postgres stuff going on inside of Japan, and Japan, in a lot of ways in the community, does its own thing. Right? They even have a different logo. They use a turtle instead of an elephant. So they have a different aspect there. There's a lot of collaboration on the development side, but from the advocacy side, it's a lot of ways separate. So this talk is really focusing on the Western world. Right? And all my slides is throughout here, I did it through using screenshots of the Postgres website. And I've used that using archive.org, which is a great service that basically archives the whole internet. It's good and scary at the same time. But in the beginning, all this stuff started back in 1996. So Postgres as a database started back in 1986, but the PostgreSQL community didn't really start until 1996. It was a university project before that, and in 1996, a group of guys said, hey, this would be pretty cool, I could use this for work a little bit, I want to move this forward, and I want to move this database forward. So they started forming a community in order to start fixing that. This is what the first Postgres website looked like. We had the word PostgreSQL busting through a brick wall. Right? And it was powered by Postgres 95. So that's what Postgres was called before PostgreSQL. Because one of the key features they added was SQL. Postgres was a no SQL database at first. Right? It used a different query language called Quell. Right? So it was a big thing to add SQL, so they made it part of the name. Right? So at the time, there was 50,000 hits at the end of the first year. Right? It's kind of moving along. 1997, we start getting some contributors. This is a little fuzzy there, so you guys can't really read it, but I'll read them for you. So we used to have the same little PostgreSQL busting through the brick wall, but we have about 15 or so contributors to it. Right? And at that time, basically the contributors were the users of Postgres. Right? There were some other users there, but by and large, if you use Postgres at the time a big way, you were contributing to it because it broke all the time, there were bugs, right? It crashed, right? There's a number of different things. So if you actually wanted to use it, you had to contribute back to it, fix those bugs, and help move it forward. So the community itself was about 15 or so people back in 1997. Jumping forward to 1999, got a new website. And this is the first time that we're seeing the elephant as the mascot, as the logo. An interesting thing here, you can't really read it here. That first paragraph, so I'm sure the slides will be available to you afterwards. The first paragraph in there is talking about Postgres corporate support by a company called PostgreSQL Inc. The community is still figuring out the open source of how that works, back and forth with corporations and how that works. But because everything was really sponsored by PostgreSQL Inc., it had the #1 header right there in the opening of the website. That's unheard of today. But the group has grown. Now there's a steering committee. Right? You start having a smaller subcommittee because the group has gotten bigger on the developers. So you started having a separate steering committee to handle other types of issues and be able to set the direction of the community. And in here, there's 4 folks. There's Mark Fournier, there's Thomas Lockhart, there's Bruce Momjin, and Vadim Mikev. Right? So of those, Bruce Momjin is still active. Mark Fournier is, I think, come back in the fold. I think he's a second quadrant employee these days. Vadim, we run into him every now and then. He works for Goldman Sachs in New York City. So he shows up to New York City meetups every now and then. but he's no longer active in the community. But also down here is the first time you see folks like Tom Lane start rearing in there. How many people know who Tom Lane is? Only about a third of the room, right? So, which is kind of what I expect. Tom is Tom is the most prolific Postgres developer on the planet. But he never makes public appearances. If you want to meet him, you have to go to Ottawa for PGCon every year. But he mostly is on the hackers mailing list, but outside of that, you don't really see him. He is a fantastic Postgres developer, but outside of the people in the hackers list, he's relatively unknown to the Postgres user community. Right? But a really, really important individual on the features and the growth of Postgres. Right? That is something that, again, because there's no marketing department, there's nothing like that, Postgres is not run by a company. If Postgres was run by a company, they would be putting out blogs by Tom Lane and things like that, things that software companies do. Right? It's a different aspect when you're talking about an open source project versus a product by a company. It's a lot of the things of what happened with MySQL was driven by MySQL, the company. So it was able to have that marketing go along with the development at the same time. Postgres doesn't have that, right? Which meant that it took a lot longer to get where we are today, but it gives us a stronger base when we get there. Jumping forward to 2000, it's the dawn of the Postgres companies. Can't read this, probably, it's definitely in the back, but in 2000, a newly formed company called GreatBridge was formed that raised $25 million. And their goal was to make Postgres the Red Hat of the open source database world. They hired all the major contributors of Postgres. They invested a lot of money in moving it forward, and then they disappeared after about 18 months or so. They went through $25 million fairly quickly. But that also was the first time that it really became something where the steering committee, it was still called the steering committee, it wasn't called core at the time, had to deal with a corporation with a lot of money and how they interact with the Postgres community. Right? So they had a marketing department, so they were doing PR and everything was embargoed. They couldn't tell anybody about what they were doing until everything was on a certain date, everything was going to be released out publicly. And they wanted involvement from the Postgres steering committee, so they had some confidentiality that they wanted them to agree to. And that made some of the Postgres community uncomfortable, right? Because it's open source, everything should be open. Why should this be confidential? So it started causing some questions of how we do these sort of things. And the GreatBridge experience really affected how a lot of other companies interact with Postgres even to today. Because of what happened, it came and went so fast, so many Postgres contributors were employed by them, and then all of a sudden they were out of a job. It caused a big thing, and then around confidentiality and things like that, it certainly affected how we did things when we initially launched Enterprise DB. But Postgres, the community, was growing. We still have the same cool website with that elephant. The number of developers have increased. The steering committee has increased to 6 people, adding Tom Lane and Jan Vik to the list of 4. So that's growing along well. 2001, I have this other interesting thing. Postgres started getting more popular a bit. So when you went to PostgreSQL.org, you were brought to this mirror site. Back then, we didn't really have content delivery networks. So you went to this thing and you picked your flag, and it brought you to the copy of the website there. The other interesting thing is there were banner ads on the main PostgreSQL website. So you're just clicking on it. And then over here, the second most important thing after the commercial support, they realized that PostgreSQL is hard to say. If you just look at it, nobody knows how to say it. Right? What is it? PostgreSQL, do you drop the SQL and it's Postgre? So they actually had waves and MP3 files to tell you how to pronounce it back then, because nobody knew how to actually pronounce this thing. It was a really, talking to a lot of the folks who were back then, they said it was probably one of the single biggest mistake that they made of the name, right? adding that SQL at the end, right? It just makes it difficult, right? From a marketing and branding standpoint, it doesn't really work, right? It was cool back in 1995, 96 that you added SQL support. Today in 2018, you just expect SQL support. It wasn't true back then, and we've been carrying it ever since. But back then, they started a new initiative. They have a new website, developer.postgresql.org. Right. So this was focused on getting new contributors to the Postgres code base. So it had things in there of what's the architecture of Postgres? How do you submit a patch? What's the to-do list? All these things were really hard to find before, and they put that in a single portal. So it encouraged more people in order to develop, which paid dividends. Now all of a sudden we have a huge list of contributors, which was fantastic, which helped move along the code base. Right. 2002, we have more flags up there from the Content Delivery Network. More banner ads up here. You can't read that in the back, but you could get your trip to Nova Scotia or Prince Edward Island off the main PostgreSQL website. Right. Then we have, again, trying to get people to pronounce it right. It's a key point what's in there. Right. And then down here, they started doing some more outreach and advocacy. It's the first time that they've presented at FOSDEM, right, of a huge open source conference in Europe. There was a 2 days of Postgres content there. So this way they started giving talks about Postgres. And also that same year, they started advocacy.postgresql.org. It worked well with the developers. Let's do the same thing with advocacy. Right, of being able to market and be able to spread the good word about Postgres. So we had a steering committee there we have now a new website team. You start seeing folks like Dave Page there for the first time because some folks aren't internal C developers, but they could contribute in other ways. So they started doing things like website stuff. And they started letting the world know about companies that support Postgres. So they started having logos on there besides just PostgreSQL Inc. Affiliates and Red Hat and SRA of being there on the website. So this way they could start telling more people about it. 2003, that advocacy group has a new website. Right? They're now using this PostgreSQL elephant too. Right? You start seeing that on the main website. Right? The interesting thing here in 2003 is right here. PGadmin 3 version 1.0 is released. So all you folks there who say PGadmin 4 don't like it, PGadmin 3 is better, PGadmin 3 has 15 years of maturing of why you're using it today. PGadmin 4 is going to get there, but it was released in 2003. It kind of looks like it was released in 2003. It's like from a UI perspective. It looks like an old UI, but it's rock solid. It works, right? So it's going to get there, but it was released in 2003 along with this website. Right? Other things, there's a user survey. What's your favorite new feature in Postgres 7.4? So again, this is driven by people that are in development, developers. They just released this cool new feature. They have this all this work that they did, and they want to find out which of these features people like the best. So the choices were auto vacuum, information schema, SQL error codes, faster in support, improved role maintenance, index maintenance, Sybase implicit join syntax, and too many to decide. So really, all those things are pretty hardcore internals type thing. A regular user that's new to Postgres wouldn't know what any of that stuff means, right? So the main thing on their website for a survey that they want to get feedback from the user community is, what of these cool features that we added internally do you like best? Right? Again, not driven by marketing folks. It's not, hey, what new feature would you like what feature would you like in a future release? Do you want partitioning? Do you want replication? Things that everybody that knows anything about databases would know about. They're asking, did you like the new auto vacuum tool we added? Right? Again, it's just all the purpose of it's, well, in order to say, hey, look at these cool things we did, as opposed to forward thinking of what should we be doing. Again, not developers thinking versus marketing people thinking, right? And that's something that's hampered Postgres for years just because of that, of its popularity, of not having that marketing focus, right? And you can see it right there from that user poll there. 2005. I think of this as the modern era of Postgres beginning. Partly because that's when the website was launched. You go to PostgreSQL today, it is the same website that we had launched in 2005. It looks the same. There's been some minor changes to it. Behind the scenes, the framework and everything has changed radically. The website looks the same as 2005. Right? That's, any new startup or anything like that, whenever they're going through, they change websites the way they change underwear, right? Every couple years, there's a new website there. Postgres, we're slow and steady. We do this same thing for decades, right? It's like, there's a new website coming, I promise. I've seen it. Right? I've seen it 3 years ago. It's getting closer, right? It looks really cool. It looks modern as of 3 years ago, but it's getting better, and it's getting close to being released, at least talking with some folks who are working on it. I'm keeping my fingers crossed that it's going to be sometime this year that we'll see a new website for Postgres, but it's the same one since 2005. The other thing is Postgres 8.0 got released. If you read the text there for what Postgres 8.0, all it says is, great, we're the best open source database. It leaves out the single biggest feature that the Postgres community ever did to increase its user base. This is the first time that Postgres natively supported Windows. So now you could actually download Postgres on your laptop or desktop, install it, and play with it as a developer. It's not mentioned anywhere on the website. Anywhere. You had to dig, right? It was a huge feature that tons of people had to do. They had to do a lot of coordination in order to be able to support Windows. Everybody was asking for it. And today, it is 70 to 80% of the downloads of Postgres are on Windows, and it's not mentioned there at all. Right? Postgres is not a marketing organization. The Postgres community is not a marketing organization. Any product manager for any software company would have that thing blasted all over there. Postgres now supports Windows. We're developers. We don't know how to do that. Right? It's just not in our mindset. Cool, we made Postgres faster. We added new index types. That's what we think of as developers. We're not marketing people. Right? So from a Postgres community standpoint, supports Windows. None of the Postgres community people use Windows. None of the developers develop on Windows. To them, it was no big deal. We've been running it on Linux for years. FreeBSD for years. All the developers run on Windows, especially in 2005. Today, there's a lot of Macs. 2005, everybody ran Windows. It's not even mentioned there. So also, the forks are launched. So Postgres, because of its license, its open source license, everybody forks Postgres because of the BSD style license, the Postgres license. You could fork it, do whatever you want with it. Postgres has been forked a number of times before 2005. This is the first time that it was forked, and the companies embraced the fact that it was forked from Postgres. So in April of 2005, a company called Greenplum launched a product called BizGres, which is an MPP data warehousing fork of Postgres. It's still active today as Pivotal. And I'll never forget the day that we launched Enterprise DB. May 23rd, 2005, we came out of stealth mode, and we were sitting there watching the downloads as they happened. Right? It was really cool. Right? It was just, hey, we're based on Postgres, added this compatibility stuff, fantastic. Everybody are going to want it. Right? It was a really exciting day, and we started learning things about the Postgres community at the time. Right? But this was the first time that companies based their stuff on Postgres and told everybody that they did. Things like Netezza was based on Postgres, but they've never told anybody that. Right? Because Postgres wasn't popular enough, it wasn't robust enough, it wasn't something to be proud of. In 2005, it was. 2006, Postgres conferences are starting. So we have the 10-year anniversary summit. So this is when, the community is now 10 years old. Everybody wanted to get together and, basically have a party in order to actually meet all these people that you've been working with over email lists forever and go and meet them face to face. It was great to have an anniversary summit. And effectively, that became the first Postgres conference, at least in the Western world view. It was in Toronto, Canada. But you can't read it at all because it's all blurry. But in February of that same year, there was a Tokyo Postgres conference. The Japanese were doing things a little bit faster, right? It's just because it's in Japan, everything's in Japanese. The rest of us didn't really know what was going on or realize it. It wasn't as renowned. But in Japan it was. But the anniversary summit was the first time that we really got together and had this conference thing. And from there, things like this grew out of it. Also, that 2006, the PUG started launching. So we had the San Francisco Postgres user group, the Portland Postgres users group, and from there, a lot of the other ones started forming. But this is the first time we started having local user groups focused around Postgres. And Planet Postgres. So now people could blog about Postgres and have that all aggregated and put onto the main Postgres website. Now people, the developers, when you write some cool content, there's a place to deliver that. Before, you put it out and it was okay. But now we're trying to get some of that interesting content through the Postgres community and onto the main website. 2007, Postgres is moving along with the same old website. 2008, same old website again. From the community aspect, we're doing things like putting out patch releases, adding new features, right? Making Postgres rock solid of being able to add new features to it. But from the external world, for the people not reading the mailing list, Postgres hasn't changed in the last couple of years. It looks exactly the same. We put out new releases. And because of our numbering system, we went from 8.2 to 8.3. To everybody, that seems like a minor release. Okay, big deal, because the rest of the world used the first number as a major release. Postgres is using the second number as a major release. So it didn't seem like, if you weren't in the know, that anything actually is happening. 2009, more of the same. Postgres put out more marketing releases. Right? We have different events here. These are different conferences that are going on. We got FOSDEM going on. We got PGCon and a number of other conferences that are there. PGEU and others are going on. But it's just the community's chugging along. We have the same things going on. But again, here, Postgres 9.0 is released. We added inbuilt streaming replication to it. So before you had to use this thing called Sloney or some other added tool in order to do replication in Postgres. Now it's all built in, it's real easy, it's a configuration setting in order to set up Postgres, and it's a little blurb on the website on Postgres 9. Again, no marketing department, nobody calling it out, nobody telling the world how great this replication stuff is. It's just a little blurb on the website. Yeah, there's a little bit of PR, but when somebody comes to the Postgres website for the first time, they want to know about this cool new feature. But along that same year, this little Ruby hosting company called Heroku launched a service called PostgreSQL by Heroku. Now all those Ruby developers who need a database just say, give me Postgres. And it's managed for them. Right? Ruby developers don't know how to manage the database. Heroku's managing it for them. So lo and behold, all these Ruby developers start using Postgres. Right? And, hey, that's a pretty cool idea. Let me run hosted Postgres. I just got a simple website. I don't need anything fancy. Why do I have to learn how to vacuum a database or back up a database? Heroku will do it for me. But that's done outside of the Postgres community. That's another company embracing Postgres and moving it forward. 2011, Postgres community is still chugging along. We got the same website, it looks the same. Postgres 9.1's out. Most of the world, 9.1 is just a minor release over 9.0. It's not a major release. If I'm not part of the Postgres community, I don't realize that's a big deal. 2012, same thing. To the outside world, Postgres looks like it's not doing very much. It's adding cool features, But unless you're actually following those mailing lists, you don't know what's going on, right? It's something that we, as a community, we struggle with, is telling the world about how good this stuff really is, right? So we get, we're doing things through these conferences, and that's what a lot of these events are, and that's what a lot of the outreaches are, conferences and user groups and stuff like that. But on the place that is most visible to the world about what is going on with Postgres, the PostgreSQL.org website, nothing's changed. 2013, again, same stuff going on, but this little company called Amazon said, hey, this Postgres stuff is pretty cool. Let's make that just as supported as MySQL, Oracle, and SQL Server. All of a sudden, a whole different group of people started knowing about Postgres. Right? It wasn't something that the community did. The community produced a fantastic product that allowed Amazon to go ahead and do that. But now a whole bunch of people, because it's there as a point-and-click option, they're starting to use Postgres. 2014, again, the community is chugging along, creating great products. 2015, again, 9.5 release candidate 1 is released. Cool, fantastic, great features. 2016, again, from the outside world, Postgres, we're doing great things on the code base, but we're not telling the world about it. 2017, Postgres 10 is released. Right? At least there we got a little blurb, we got native partitioning and all this other stuff. Right? But it's very technical of what they're saying there. They're not saying Postgres is now more scalable, it's more performant, it's more secure. It's saying, hey, we introduced Scram authentication. I know what Scram authentication means. I don't know what the acronym stands for off the top of my head without Google, right? But it's there right on the main website. Again, it's focused on developers internally being proud of their work, which is fantastic work. But a user, a Ruby developer, a Python developer, doesn't know what Scram authentication is, and they don't care, and they don't have to care. But also, that's the same year, last year, both Google and Microsoft also released their own managed Postgres services. So now, all the major cloud players, whether that's going to be Microsoft, Google, Amazon, or Salesforce, all have Postgres as a strategic platform, right? And at least Microsoft is here, and go talk to them, say thank you, and help promoting the fact that Postgres is there, right? But today, so looking at the community today, when you look at it from the PostgreSQL website, the community is this 5-person core team, about 20 or so committers, and then about 100 or so contributors to the code base. Right? That's the community when you look at it from the PostgreSQL.org website. When you look at it in a little bit more depth, there's a whole lot of tools contributors, the people doing PG admin, people writing the JDBC driver, the ODBC driver, the monitoring tools, the backup tools. You look at that community, it gets even bigger. But when you widen it out more, you have the advocates. It's all the speakers that are at this conference today and tomorrow. It's all the people that are participating and talking at the user groups, people writing blogs about Postgres, people advocating the use of Postgres. It starts getting bigger and bigger. But when you actually look at the user base, it has grown tremendously. I'm just guessing, and it's on the order of 100,000 users. It's probably well more than that at this point, just by the number of Postgres databases that are out there in the world. It's got to be a lot more than that. But when you look at that just makes the community just a small sliver of the people that really love Postgres. Also, what just happened today, or actually about a month ago, Postgres was declared Database of the Year for 2017. It was the fastest growing database ranked by DB Engines. It is still the 4th most popular database, according to the rankings. It's somewhere between 3 and 4 times less popular than Oracle, SQL Server, and MySQL. But that gap has narrowed. Back when we launched Enterprise DB, we were about 1/20th as popular. So now we're 1/3 or 1/4. It has narrowed tremendously. Also, Postgres is now a strategic platform for all the major companies in our industry. All the major cloud players, the hardware vendors, anybody that's using Postgres, anybody that's significant in our industry, now thinks Postgres as significant and strategic. These are not just users. These are people who are building their business around Postgres. There's a lot of people using it. The logos that we could put up of people using Postgres, it would fill up this entire wall, not just the screen. But these are people who are taking Postgres and using it in a strategic fashion and moving it forward with Amazon RDS or Microsoft Azure, right? Or Google Cloud, or Dell EMC and IBM, all of them. Even Apple is strategically using Postgres in a very major way. So where does that take us for tomorrow? It is just growing. It's hard to tell where it's going to stop. Right? With all of these major companies now embracing Postgres in a strategic fashion, now Postgres has a marketing department. Right? All of these companies are now promoting their use of Postgres. So they're encouraging people to use their version of Postgres, which encourages more people to learn about Postgres internals and other things. Now there's marketing people in major companies pushing Postgres forward that was never there before. So folks like Microsoft and Amazon moving those things forward, talking about Postgres in places that we've never been to in a community, talking to Fortune 500 companies, to the CIOs of the biggest companies in the world, talking about Postgres. When we started this the community started back in 1996 with that PostgreSQL busting through the wall, right, of just a handful of people using it. Never thought it would get to that point. Right? It was really tough to get there without the advocacy and the marketing side of it. But because the community produced such good code, such quality code, and steadily did it year after year, eventually the rest of the business world caught on. That we have a fantastic product that's here, let's start using it. And now there's a marketing so we can tell the rest of the world about it. So will we be the #1 database in the world in 10 years from now? Maybe, right? The fact that it's open source and free and can do a lot of the things that Oracle and SQL Server can, I don't see why not. Thank you.